This is the Physical Activity Researcher Podcast, a podcast for researchers of sedentary behavior, physical activity, and sports. Join for a relaxed dialogue about research design, practicalities, and, well, anything related to research. Learn from your fellow researchers useful and relevant information that does not fit into formal content and limited space of scientific publications. And here is your host.
Welcome everyone. This is the Meaningful Sport podcast, and I am your host, Noora Ronkainen. Meaningful Sport is a series of discussions on the why and how involvement in sport and physical activity can be an important part of a life worth living. We will also explore threats to meaningful engagement in sport and movement culture practices and ask questions about what we can learn about the human condition through our involvement in sport. The guests are leading scholars in human and social sciences of sport who share their explorations in a scholarly as well as a personal context. If you are interested in the theme, you might also want to check out meaningfulsport.com. There you can find podcast show notes, read a blog, and access many resources for further explorations of meaningful sport. And if you want to stay up to date on future episodes, events, and new resources, you can sign up for a newsletter at meaningfulsport.com. In today's episode, we will explore how the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche can help us understand sporting phenomena and the meaning and value of sport in human life. I am very excited to have such a great guest in today's episode who has written extensively on Nietzsche and sport and is also the author of the book Emotion in Sport, Philosophical Perspectives. Our guest teaches philosophy at the New School, New York, and in New York University's Liberal Studies program. He is a member of the International Association for the Philosophy of Sport and is co-founder of the Nietzsche Circle and a member of the editorial board of its journal, The Agonist. And how I got to know our guest is through participating in a trip he organized to the Nietzsche House, which is located in Sils Maria in Switzerland. The trip was organized through Philomobile, which is a special travel organization founded by our guest, offering trips to those interested in combining the study of philosophy and culture with traveling. So welcome, Professor Yunus Tuncel.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the good introduction. Thank you, Noora.
It's really an honor to have you as a guest today. And I have to say that my own interest and understanding of Nietzsche, it really took a big step in the Philomobile trip to Sils Maria that you organized. Just to kind of give the background, so we spent a week in a small group in the Nietzsche House, studying Nietzsche and doing some hikes in the areas where Nietzsche used to hike himself in between his writing. And that was such a much more engaging way to learn about Nietzsche than participating in a conference and listening to presentations, for example. So maybe as a start, I think the listeners would be interested in Philomobile. So maybe tell us a little bit about what you do and what kind of future trips you have planned. And I guess that the COVID crisis has had an impact on that too.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, the project started about 15 years ago. So I brought two passions together, philosophy and traveling. And I said it would be great to study these philosophers and places where they lived. I'm not a professional organization, as you know, a very small organization. I work with other teachers. And we we prepare a trip and then do it if we have enough people to do it. So we first did it in 2010. In fact, it was a Nietzsche trip, not at just one location, but we did a long trip from Nietzsche's hometown, if he had a hometown, Naumburg, the Leipzig region, all the way down to Italy. And then after that, I did several trips. So yeah, the idea is actually the way you put it. Instead of just sitting and listening to papers, which we always do in academia, I think this is a more exciting, stimulating way to engage with ideas, to meet people. We met a lot of people on the Nietzsche trip that we did, a lot of Nietzsche scholars. We had dialogues with them. We also go to museums and houses and things like that. So it was very, very exciting. And also ours too. Ours was a different kind, more like a retreat in one place. which is also very stimulating to be in the Alps, where Nietzsche did hiking. Yeah. So then, all right. We did have plans for this year. Actually, I work with psychoanalysts. We had a trip planned for Freud, one trip analysis from Jung, but unfortunately, everything had to be cancelled. I was not going to lead them because typically people who are experts in their fields become the main lecturer. But then I also studied ancient Greece, and I was going to lead a trip to Ionia, ancient Ionia, that is also cancelled or postponed. So all travelings are on hold. They're all cancelled or postponed as of March. Uh, so yeah, I hope to do more if people are interested, and depending on the groups we find, take them to their places, and yeah. So that's the main. We have a website, philomobile.com. Those who like to visit and send me a note, I can respond.
Yeah, thanks. And I really have to say that hiking the same paths that I can imagine Nietzsche hiking, and we saw the restaurant where he used to go to eat, and
Right.
and seeing the room where he used to sleep. So that really gives you a very different experience from just listening to papers,
Yeah.
just like you said.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's something, yeah, I can also highly recommend that. And
Yes.
I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah.
And all the debates we had
Yeah.
about Nietzsche and sport.
Yes.
So you said that in the trips you have typically people who are experts in that topic. So I think for us it would be quite interesting to hear, why did you pick Nietzsche as the philosopher that you have focused? What is in Nietzsche's philosophy that attracts you personally?
Oh, that's a big question. I can get into a little bit more biographic information if you like. In my college years, I was a little bit left-oriented, a little bit, youthful idealist, and I was also very much into sciences, technology. Then I became disillusioned and started reading philosophy. And when I read Nietzsche's philosophy, of course, a lot of philosophers had an impact on me, but Nietzsche had a drastic impact because of his culture critique. All the things that he was saying made sense. I said, I could have said this, but the thing is, he had written some 100 years before me. So, yeah, it was like an amazing kind of an experience reading all the things that is critique of, religion, the belief in absolute truths, his perspectivism, even his ideas on Dionysian, the investing in the human character rather than following some ideologies blindly. So yeah, all of those things just had just the impact, and I mean, it's been many years now. I'm still reading Nietzsche and writing. Of course, I do read other philosophers, and in fact, I've done quite a work on French, 20th century French philosophers as well, but still read Nietzsche, and just the wealth of ideas. Even like we'll talk about that later, but even Nietzsche has a lot to say on sports. And to my best knowledge, there's not a single book on Nietzsche and sports yet, as far as I know. I may be wrong. There's so many books now, but I haven't seen that. So, but it's not only that. I mean, scholars are writing on Nietzsche on naturalism, Nietzsche's critical of religion. He has a lot of ideas on culture, culture making. And that's why he has a kind of broad appeal to different kinds of readers. You have psychoanalysts reading Nietzsche. In fact, a friend of mine, amazing, he published an amazing book. His name is Jerry Russell, Nietzsche and the Clinic. You have, I don't know, strictly people doing philosophy, epistemology that deals with knowledge. How knowledge is possible. Nietzsche's ideas of perspectivism, that there are no facts, only interpretations and multiple interpretations. I can go on the list. I mean, I'm working on a book on human emotions right now, and Nietzsche also has lots of ideas on that topic. And there's one book that was published a long time ago, but he has so many ideas, and there's not a single book that came out in the last, I don't know, 50 years. So hopefully, I will make an interesting case on Nietzsche's teachings on feelings and emotions. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the wealth of ideas. and very thought provoking. You have to be a little bit, not a little, you have to be a strong reader, not and face some of Nietzsche's harsh criticism of human existence, human culture, and not shy away. So. And we don't have to agree with everything he says. I don't. I mean, I do have disagreements as well, but still, he provokes the reader to keep reading and face these sort of honest, whatever insights, conclusions about human existence.
And like you said, Nietzsche really has a broad range of ideas and broad range of topics, but for a non-philosopher, the only things that they might be familiar with is just Nietzsche being attributed to declaring that God is dead. And the other thing that kind of links to sport is this saying that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And kind of when you start looking into it a bit more, you will, just like you said, there will be a lot of ideas that can be applied to sport and help us understand some phenomena in sport as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lot to ask from me to kind of summarize Nietzsche's philosophy, especially with this kind of amount of time in a few minutes. But maybe you can just give little overview of what would be kind of the central ideas of Nietzsche's thought that kind of run through his philosophy, and why is it worthwhile for somebody who is researching sport and physical activity to start reading Nietzsche?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Nietzsche's main philosophy is culture, value. So his background, just he studied philology, Greek classicism, and then he gave himself to philosophy. He is a self-taught philosopher. He did not study philosophy professionally, and then he started teaching at Basel University in Switzerland. Today it is in Switzerland, and then started writing books. So basically, many of his books have to do with culture. But by culture, I mean it could be religion, history, science, philosophy, all those things that make up the Geist, the culture, right? So connected to that philosophy of culture, you could also say value. So yeah, Nietzsche doesn't talk much about value in his early writings. But later on, around the time when he announces the death of God, which is in the Gay Science, the book Gay Science, Fröhliche Wissenschaft, that's when he also starts talking about value. So basically, yeah, his main philosophy is philosophy of culture and value. According to Nietzsche, a culture or a civilization is made up of values, or what he calls highest values. And in the 19th century, he sees many problems. Being a scholar of Greek classics, having studied philosophy on his own, and being familiar with history and literature. Now he can look at back history and the 19th century European culture, and he sees many problems. He sees the whole evolution of, let's say, European civilization, and he sees problems, what went wrong from his standpoint, and why and how things went wrong, and what were the ancient ideals. Nietzsche upholds the ancient Greeks, especially the tragic Greeks prior to the rise of Socratic rationalism. Historically, that would be 800 to roughly 450 BC. And then so based on his training knowledge of that part of ancient Greece, he critiques the European culture of the 19th century. He is heavily critical of Christianity. He comes from a Lutheran background. He knows the Bible very well. I mean, he's not sort of attacking, critiquing religion or Christianity based on some not non-knowledge. I mean, he knows the Bible very well. He was brought up in Lutheran tradition, and he's also critical of Christianity. And then he announced the death of God. By the way, that the death of God is not just a religious issue. I mean, it's all about the culture. It's epic making. I mean, it's all about the civilization, really. It's not just about religion. Yes, religion included, but the way God for Nietzsche stands for many different values, including the repression of the body. That's going to be important for us. Denial of the body that he sees in Christianity, but also in other religions. You also have that. And now, what would sports people take from Nietzsche? Nietzsche is one of the first thinkers I don't want to say the first. There may be several other thinkers in the 19th century, but really the first major thinker to understand the body, to return to the human body, and to see its role in culture. He sees that the body has been put down or repressed. Repression, okay, that's a psychoanalytic term. You may not find it that often in Nietzsche's writings, but the denial, this contempt for the body. In fact, in Das Spoke Zarathustra, there's a phrase despises of the body. So whatever term you use, basically the human body has been denied, and now we have to understand. And the body is to him very crucial. I mean, he's not saying we are only bodies, but the body is very crucial, and we haven't understood it. We completely neglected it. Now the question is, how can we come back? How can we return to the body, bring it back to culture? Of course, sport as a physical exercise is one fundamental area, and pretty much since the 19th century is I would say beginning of sport culture in Europe. So you have, if like things like soccer or football start in the 19th century, even other sports, and they become more and more a part of the culture. And today, I guess many people experience sport in one way or another, either play a sport or watch sports. So, anyway, we'll talk about Nietzsche and sports maybe in detail later, but that's what I could say. So, basically, we need to look into Nietzsche's ideas on the body. You would find them all throughout his writings, but maybe more significantly after the gay science, specifically on the topic of denial of the body and what it means. But even prior to the gay science in his early writings, The Birth of Tragedy, you can still elicit ideas. You can withdraw ideas from Nietzsche's writing on the body, especially the Dionysian. Dionysian is also a physical experience. But anyway, so I'll maybe stop here. But if you have more questions on anything that I need to reflect on at a deeper level, let me know.
Wonderful. You already gave a really nice overview of different ideas, and you kind of looked into kind of the later works and also mentioned the early work as well. So maybe we'll just start a little bit from the beginning of Nietzsche's works. So you mentioned The Birth of Tragedy. That was his first book that was also heavily critiqued by some, and also Nietzsche was later critical of his own work. However, as you mentioned, there are some interesting ideas. You mentioned the Dionysian, so he had this dualism between the Dionysian and the Apollonian forces, and that's something that you have also written about when you have written about Nietzsche, sport, and contemporary culture. So maybe we should start exploring from there. So can you explain a little bit about what these forces are, and
Sure.
how do you think they are relevant for understanding sports?
Yeah, sure. Okay, that was, as you said, that was his first published book. He was a young professor at Basel. His main thing was to understand the Greek theater, the tragedy. It's a major artwork, total artwork that had a big impact on the Greek culture. It has started in the 6th century BC, officially 534 BC. And then Nietzsche sees that as a great thing, as a great cultural event. But then in the 5th century BC, it starts declining. So he's basically looking at both the microcosmos of ancient Greece, which he knows a lot about, but also the macro picture, so the small and the bigger picture. So he's looking at Greek theater, but also trying to understand what's happening in ancient Greece at the time. Now, he's not the first to have, a perception or a theory of tragedy. There are other philosophers, but he has a unique position because he brings these ideas, as you mentioned, Apollonian and Dionysian, and of course he also sees a rise and a decline in Greek tragedy. Decline is with the last playwright, Euripides. Many scholars don't agree with Nietzsche's diagnosis, but in any case, he has interesting ideas to say. Basically, you have this great artistic force, this creative force, which is based on mythology, Greek mythology. But then later on, because of the rise of rationality, and Socrates sort of symbolizes that rationality, this great art form comes to decline, comes to end. And Euripides is the kind of the spokesperson for Socrates in arts, in theater. So anyway, that's Nietzsche's thesis. Now, as for the Apollonian and Dionysian, he introduces these two principles. Let me just briefly explain to our audience what they are. So Apollonian has to do with the principle of individuation. Dionysian is the opposite, the absence of individuated state, what we can call nothingness, right? No being. So Apollonian, individuated being. The Dionysian, there's no individuated. The end of being, the death of being, if you will. So now Nietzsche introduced these two principles. They are cosmological, metaphysical principles. We can apply them to anything, like any being, right? Every being comes to the being, becomes, and then ends. So then the rise, the birth, and individuation of that being can be explained by the Apollonian, and the end of being with Dionysian. Now, Nietzsche takes these metaphysical or cosmological principles and applies them to theater. So then, for the most part of the book, these principles are used as aesthetic principles, right? Because he's applying them to arts. I don't want to get into that thing because our topic is sports, how they could be applicable. Later on, Nietzsche was critical of these two principles because he thought it was dualistic, and then he would reconcile them, bring them together into one thought. That's my reading of eternal return. So, eternal return of the same is actually a non-dualistic idea that brings life and death, being and nothingness together in one thought. So that's why the later Nietzsche didn't really like the dualistic structure, the dualistic linguistics, so to speak, that he used in The Birth of Tragedy. So now there's only one thought, the eternal return of the same. In fact, he introduces that idea in The Gay Science. It's the same book where he announces the death of God. That's aphorism 125. And then it is the same book later, book 4, now the numbers, aphorism, I believe 343, where he presents his idea of eternal return. So now coming back to the application of these two principles to sports, right? That was the second part of your question, Nora. Look, pretty much you can apply these principles to almost anything. He did it for arts, but we can do it for sports. So yes, we are individual beings. So that would be explained by the Apollonian. By the way, Nietzsche does not deny the Apollonian. That's a footnote I forgot to say. When people read The Birth of Tragedy, they think Nietzsche is now promoting only the Dionysian. That's not the case. I think his point is that the Dionysian has been denied, has been repressed so long because of our excessive rationality that we inherited from ancient Greece. And now we need to we need to understand those Dionysian forces and bring them back. So then we need a balance between the Apollonian and the Dionysian rather than only the Dionysian. So I just want to add that part so that we have a little bit better, clearer understanding of these two ideas. So in sports, yes, we are individual, and Nietzsche does not deny the role of the individual. We must be, the best that we can be. There is, the idea of great individualism in Nietzsche, but then yet we are not only individual people. The others coexist with us. So we need to be connected to our environment, to other people, other beings that are around us. That would be the Dionysian. How does the Dionysian have to do with others? Well, the Dionysian, one meaning of the Dionysian is ecstasy. Ecstasy, not the drug itself, the ecstasis, the Greek word. It means to come out of yourself, and to be connected to other beings. And of course, we know the root words of these terms: Apollo, Dionysus, and Dionysus is the god of the wine drinking, festivals, parties, but also the orgiastic rites. So he's the god of ecstasy. In fact, he symbolized ecstasy in the best possible way out of all Greek gods. Dionysian means to come out of yourself, to be ecstatic, to be connected to other people, others, in a way, what Merleau-Ponty calls embodiment, probably has a lot to do with also the Dionysian. Embodiment means to be one body with others, like in a team, right? When a team, for a team to
Mm-hmm.
succeed, right, they have to be one body almost, although not physically, but rather they have to move together, they have to coordinate. That is what Merleau-Ponty calls embodiment. He believes that the babies, when they're born, they already have it, but then we later on lose it. Why do we lose it? We become more conscious of ourselves. We think too much, we analyze and all that. Yeah, we could lose embodiment. So basically, to be embodied, we have to be the Dionysian. So Dionysian means to be really connected. So now there are different levels of being connected, and that's where the Dionysian comes in. First, with a team, your own team, but even your own opponents. Although they are your opponents, you are playing a game. You have to be somewhat connected to them as well. And then the bigger picture, you have the audience, the spectators, fans, and all that. So there's a whole big Dionysian community. What is Nietzsche's ultimate point, really, for human beings and cultures to strive for higher goals and states, right? The whole idea of overhuman, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned there's so many. Nietzsche is such a controversial thinker that I'm sure whatever I say, the next Nietzsche scholar will disagree with me. Fine, as long as I have backing with the text, I can argue and debate. So the overhuman, people are these in the great individuals. They could do whatever they want, and they're detached. They don't have to care for their society. That is not my reading of overhuman. I think overhuman. Yeah, yes, I agree with Nietzsche. There are higher types, but these higher types have also responsibility. They are connected to their community, their society, so they have to elevate them as well. In fact, the more the society is elevated, the higher these higher types will be. Some Nietzsche scholars would disagree with me. They would say no, they could rise higher and they don't really have to care much about their society. I I'm not in agreement with that position, and I don't see radical individualism in Nietzsche. Yes, individualism, great individualism, but they are connected. These great individuals are connected to their culture. So then, in sports, some athletes become whatever more elevated. They become star athletes. There's, from a Nietzschean standpoint, there's nothing wrong in striving or perfecting yourself, becoming better. But there's no how can I put it? It is not hubristic. I mean, Greeks were also opposed to that. Hubris means excessive pride. Uh, Ancient Greeks didn't like it. I don't think Nietzsche likes it either. You could be elevated, but there's not that doesn't give you any right to be arrogant, to be hubristic, and dismiss other people's struggles and other people's overcomings to become towards becoming their own higher selves. So in sports, basically, yeah, we make our own individual beings in sports. We strive and we become better athletes, but yet we must be also connected to our community, to others, to our spectators. Yes, spectators have had also a role in this whole thing. Nietzsche was very critical of passive spectator, even in the birth of tragedy. But now, there,
Mm-hmm.
of course, in an artistic context, in theater, basically, spectators are not just passive beings, but they're very much connected to the stage, to their myth, as it is stage performed on stage. The heroes, the fall of the hero, and they're kind of one. Yes, they are not hero themselves. They do uphold the hero, the heroic. They must uphold the Dionysian, because the core in theater is the chorus that upholds the Dionysian. Right, the music, dance, song are the most Dionysian elements, and through the chorus, the Dionysian is upheld, sustained, and the spectators have to somehow respect or uphold the same Dionysian forces in theater. Similarly, We can say in sports, you must uphold the ecstatic, the Dionysian community that's gathered against before a game.
A lot of ideas in here. So
Yeah.
you said that Nietzsche in his early work was not writing against the Apollonian, but kind of saying that there needs to be this balance between these two forces. And
Right.
and his diagnosis was with Socrates that we'd gone too rational and too Apollonian. So what would Nietzsche think about sport as we know it today? Has the balance gone wrong? And if it has, what way?
Well, that's a very tough question. The balance, yeah. Well, okay. First, let me start with something. Nietzsche would be critical of mass culture. Other things, all the things that happen out of context of sport, I think Nietzsche would be critical of. I would say commercialization, the excessive money culture. Yeah, they all the money, but that's part of our economic system. I think he would be critical of that, although he doesn't write much about capitalism and economy, but he was looking into the spirit, the Geist, the culture itself, the cultural forces. So anything that ruins, that destroys those cultural forces would be a problem from a Nietzschean standpoint. Okay, let's, I get the league system. Would Nietzsche, I think no, Nietzsche would support the league system. I'm just looking into some things in sports today, all right? The league system,
Mm-hmm.
Nietzsche would support because, we play at different levels. So it's important that more or less equals play. So that goes with his teaching of competition, agonism. That's my book is on
Mm-hmm.
that. In terms of what else can we say? I already mentioned commercialization. I think it would be very critical of that. Elitism in sports. I that's another tough one. I mean, it depends on how the elite sports plays itself out. In elite sports, there's also a lot of risk taking in some of the elite sports. I don't think Nisha would be opposed to that. But if elitism sort of denies the newcomers, young athletes, I guess that would be that he may be critical of that because they're establishing this kind of their hegemony and they do not take anyone in. Other things about elite sports, but risk games, I think Nietzsche would be okay with that. In fact, that has a lot to do with the externalization of our the destructive instincts, the death drive. Some risk sports we also come close with death, and I do not think Nietzsche would be opposed to that as long as we are strong and we can handle those kinds of experiences. In fact, the phrase that everybody knows, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. So Nietzsche would not be opposed to those kinds of risk taking or combat sports. But the elite sports, it really depends on how the elites play out their role in their exemplary model. I mean, they're, as I said earlier, if they're hubristic, they're arrogant, that would be arrogant means that they are now the champion and they think they're champion for life, forever. This kind of they're the only ones. This type of attitude, yeah, Nietzsche would be very critical of.
I think when talking about elite sport, I would be curious about kind of the balance between the rationalism and then when you've written also about Nietzsche being very favorable kind of with the ideas about play and how he would celebrate play as
Right.
something that is very spontaneous and kind of purposeless and somehow useless activity that is more Dionysian, I guess, in terms of it's something that you don't think and you don't rationalize. So do the elite athletes have any space for that, or is
Mm.
everything planned and everything
Uh-huh.
rationalized?
Oh, good. That's a very good question. Yeah, definitely. I mean, Nietzsche is definitely for play. Let's talk about different things. Now, we could have sport culture where these playful forces play spontaneous and all that, right? In general, in culture,
Mm-hmm.
they don't have to follow any structure. It's kind of like, spontaneously going to a dance club and dancing, right? And we can all play at some capacity. But then when it comes to competition, formal games, we are talking, yes, we are talking about the Apollonian structure. So more the Apollonian, of course, sport is always as Dionysian elements. So when you are talking about formalized sport, yes, there's more Apollonian in that. But the more Apollonian should not, from a Nietzschean standpoint, would not crush or would not take away the Dionysian forces. So look, what I'm trying to say is that Dionysian forces can be cultivated, can be or must be cultivated in a kind of in a more spontaneous forms in culture overall, as you put it, and the idea of playfulness. But then where they could crystallize, we can give style to them, structure, which will be more Apollonian, as we create these formations to play games as a league system or the Olympic Games and all that. So they're more structured there, more formal, and there's of course Apollonian element. So the question is,
Mm-hmm.
whether we have these Dionysian forces that are cultivated in the culture at the same time, the Apollonian forces, and whatever we do in cultivating them, we do not stop. We do not prefer one or the other from a cultural standpoint, overall culture, not just individually. I would say, yeah, elite sports would fall under more the Apollonian, the more formalized. These elite athletes go through competition. Many they go through a lot of elimination, and then finally they come to whatever the top level, and they compete against whatever the more or less equal elite athletes. And there are obviously more Apollonian structures there. But remember, I mean, we do live in a highly rational culture at the same time. Just take that time. I know this probably is a completely different topic, but we
Mm-hmm.
time itself is an organizing rational principle, right? We have to whatever play at this time, from this time to until that time. Everything is measured. The whole game is structured. As you go back to ancient times, there's no there's no clock, there's no timing. In fact, ancient athletes, Greek athletes, played until they were defeated. I mean, in the case of combat games. So with the
Mm-hmm.
races, they did run. Yeah, they did run a length, some length. The distance was their measure, but there was no time. They did not measure time. They didn't have any clocks anyway. So now, I mean, that already. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is, our age is already very rational, and I guess Nietzsche was trying to show the excessive rationality that our age brought itself into, and how possibly we can bring back those spontaneous playful forces, exactly what you were saying. And play, by the way, play is a big topic in Nietzsche. I have a very short section in my article on Nietzsche and sports, but it's big in Nietzsche. I mean, I hope somebody writes a book maybe on Nietzsche playfulness. It is definitely play, yeah, playfulness. We forget how to play. That's why sport is crucial, right? Kids are
Mm-hmm.
playful when they're born, babies, and then we grow older, we become serious. We forget how to become playful, and sport is one way of bringing back. I'm sure there are other ways, but sport is one way of bringing back the playfulness, which is very primary in life. And Nietzsche would definitely accept that, although he doesn't really speak a lot directly about playfulness. But there are many different metaphors about playfulness in Nietzsche. Not only through sport, he talks a lot about dance, but he was a musician
Mm-hmm.
himself. He was a pianist, and also he composed some music. But he also used a lot of dance symbolism. So dance is also a form of playfulness.
So, if we think of Nietzsche and how he was critical of many of the cultural developments, do you think Nietzsche would be critical of the development of sport culture?
I think he would he would support the development of sport culture, as long as the Apollonian and Dionysian forces come together. The playful forces, ecstatic forces come also are promoted. and he would be very critical of mass culture in the sports. He would, if I may say it, he would focus on the spirit of sport. Now, of course, you could say, what is the spirit of sport? Playing, competing, the physical activity with little or less interventional rational forces. Yes, there will be a structure. Okay, look at the Greek theater, right? Greek theater, Nietzsche admired. Yes, he critiqued the later part, but it had a structure too. We having a structure. No, we have to have it. I mean, I don't think Nietzsche would be opposed to having structures. That's the Apollonian part. We need to have them. So we need to create some boundaries, yes, and within those boundaries, then we become playful, we become spontaneous. Yeah, so he would definitely support the sport culture, but he would be critical of excessive rational forces, the mass culture, so the lowering of standards. Nietzsche always was for higher standards, whether they are aesthetic criteria or other cultural criteria. So we have to always strive for higher goals, higher states. That will apply to sports as well. There will be exemplary athletes, the elite athletes. Nietzsche would not be opposed to that, as long as they have positive influence on their culture, as they bring others with them to higher standards as well. So yeah, Nietzsche would not be opposed to that. Would not be opposed to sport culture or even elite sports, as long as it is played out according to the spirit of sport.
Thanks for joining us this week on Physical Activity Researcher Podcast. If you like the show, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing or following the show on Twitter. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. If you found value in the show, we would really appreciate a rating on Apple Podcast or whichever app you're using. Or if you would, in a real old school way, simply tell a friend about the show. It would be a great help for us. We have a fantastic lineup of guests for forthcoming episodes, so be sure to tune in. Thank you all for your support and have a great day.